The dinner was supposed to be a celebration. My cousin Heather had just gotten engaged, and my aunt had booked a private room at Carrabba's, the one on Route 9 that our family had been going to since I was in middle school. White tablecloths, breadsticks, the whole thing. I remember driving there thinking it would be a nice night. I had just closed a big project at work. I was in a good mood and I genuinely wanted to celebrate her. I should have known better. I'm 31 now. I've been a UX designer at a mid-sized tech company in Austin for the past 5 years, and before that, I spent 3 years grinding through junior roles and freelance contracts to build up enough of a portfolio that someone would actually pay me a real salary. I don't come from money. My mom worked 2 jobs most of my childhood. My dad was mostly absent. And when I got my first real paycheck, I made a promise to myself that I would never let the people I loved struggle the way we had. That promise, I would later understand, was the most expensive thing I ever did. It started small. I'm not even sure exactly when it became what it became. My aunt, my mom's younger sister, had been going through a rough few years financially. Her husband had been laid off in 2021 and never really recovered his footing. They had 3 kids, a mortgage in a suburb of Columbus, and a gap between their income and their expenses that widened quietly while everyone pretended not to notice. I noticed, and I stepped in. At first, it was a few $100s here and there, a car repair, a month's worth of groceries when things were tight. I didn't make a big deal of it because I didn't want them to feel embarrassed. My aunt is proud. She doesn't ask for help easily. So I made it feel natural. I'd say things like, I had a good month, let me cover this. Or, I was going to Costco anyway, let me grab some stuff for you guys. It felt good. I felt like I was doing something meaningful with the money I was earning. Then it grew. My cousin Heather, the one who was now getting engaged, was a junior at Ohio State and struggling with tuition costs. Her parents were covering what they could, but it wasn't enough. I started contributing to her tuition payments. 300 a month, then 500, then 800 when the fees went up. I told myself it was temporary. She would graduate, get a job, and things would stabilize. My aunt's youngest, a boy named Theo, who was 17 at the time, needed braces. I covered it. My uncle's truck broke down, and the repair estimate came in at $2,100. I covered that too. When my aunt mentioned offhand that she and my uncle hadn't had a vacation in 4 years, I quietly booked them a long weekend at a cabin in the Hocking Hills and told them it was an early Christmas gift. I wasn't keeping a running total. That was probably my first mistake. Because when I finally sat down and looked at my bank statements about 2 years into all of this, the number was larger than I had let myself acknowledge. More than I want to write here, honestly. Enough to have made a serious dent in a down payment on a house. Enough to have changed my retirement projections. I remember staring at the screen and feeling not exactly angry, more like dizzy. Like I had been walking in one direction for so long without looking up that I hadn't realized I'd wandered somewhere I didn't intend to go. But I kept going. Because what do? Call your aunt and ask for it back? What I did not account for is that generosity, when it becomes invisible, stops feeling like generosity to the people receiving it. It becomes infrastructure. It becomes assumed. And once something is assumed, the person providing it stops being seen as someone making a sacrifice and starts being seen as a resource. I became a resource. I found this out in pieces, small comments here and there. My aunt once mentioned to someone at a family gathering that I did well for myself, in a tone that made it sound less like pride and more like an explanation for why I was expected to contribute. My uncle joked once about how nice it was that I didn't have a family to worry about, meaning a husband, meaning kids, so I had more flexibility. Heather once asked me, not unkindly, but without much consideration either, if I could increase my contribution to her tuition because she wanted to move off campus junior year, and the apartment she liked was a little over her budget. She didn't ask if I could afford it. She didn't say please very enthusiastically. She just asked, the way you'd ask someone to pass the salt. I said yes. Of course I did. I was still in the mode of saying yes. And then came the dinner. Heather's fiancé, a guy named Connor, who I had met exactly twice, was there with his parents, who were lovely, and his younger sister, who mostly kept to herself. My uncle was in a good mood. My aunt looked beautiful. The bread came out and people were laughing, and for about 20 minutes, I thought the night was going to be fine. Then someone asked me if I was seeing anyone. I'm not. I haven't been in a serious relationship in about 2 years. I date occasionally, but nothing has stuck, and genuinely, I am okay with that. I like my life. I have a good apartment, a job I find challenging, friends I love, a dog named Pretzels who I would die for. I am 31 years old, and I am not in crisis about being single. It is simply where I am right now. I said as much, lightly, and tried to redirect the conversation. Heather laughed. Not a mean laugh, exactly, but not a kind one either. It was the laugh of someone who thinks they're being funny and hasn't checked whether the other person agrees. She said, and I'm going to write this as close to exactly as I can remember it. Still flying solo? I feel like at some point you just have to settle down, you know? Like you can't just be the fun and forever. The table went a little quiet. Connor's mom looked at her water glass. My uncle cleared his throat. My aunt did not say anything. I felt something shift inside me. Not dramatic. Not like I flipped a table or started shaking. More like something that had been slowly tilting for a long time finally reached the tipping point and went over. I smiled and said something noncommittal, and the conversation moved on, and I sat there for the rest of dinner, being perfectly pleasant, eating my chicken marsala, laughing at the right moments. But I was doing math in my head. On the drive home, I called my best friend and I just talked. For about an hour. I wasn't crying. I was calm, actually, in a way that felt almost strange, like the calmness that comes after a decision has been made and you're just waiting to execute it. My friend listened and then she said, "You already know what you're going to do, don't you?" And I said yes. That weekend, I sat down with my laptop and I went through everything, every transaction, every Venmo, every bank transfer, every time I had said, "I got this," at a dinner. I made a spreadsheet. The number, when I finally had it all in one place, was $47,000 over 3 years. $47,000 that I had given without being asked to show gratitude, without a single acknowledgement that this was not normal, without even a conversation about whether it was sustainable. $47,000, and my 26-year-old cousin had just sat at a dinner table in front of her future in-laws and implied that my life was somehow less than hers because I didn't have a ring on my finger. I'm not telling this story because I want sympathy. I'm telling it because I think some of you know exactly what this spreadsheet feels like. The following Monday, I called my bank and set up a new account that was separate from the one I had been using for family transfers. I moved my automatic contributions, the ones I had set up for Heather's tuition, for my aunt's cell phone plan that I had added myself to years ago because it saved them money, for the small recurring transfer I sent to help with groceries. I moved them all to pending cancellation. I set an end date 2 weeks out. I wanted to give a little buffer, not because I owed it to them, but because I didn't want anyone to miss a bill payment without warning. Then I wrote a letter. Not a text, not an email. A letter. Because I wanted it to be something they could read slowly, not something they could respond to in 30 seconds with a string of reaction emojis. I told them that I loved them. I told them that I had been happy to help when I could, and that helping had come from a genuine place. I told them that the comment at dinner had clarified something for me that I hadn't wanted to look at directly, which was that the support I had been providing had stopped being received as generosity and had started being treated as an entitlement. I told them I was stepping back. I did not send a copy of the spreadsheet. I thought about it. I decided it would feel like a weapon, and I didn't want it to be a weapon. I just wanted it to be a door closing, not a war. I mailed it on a Tuesday. By Thursday, my aunt had called me 4 times. I let it go to voicemail the first 3 times because I wasn't ready. The fourth time, I answered. She wasn't screaming. My aunt is not a screamer. She was hurt, and she was confused, and she kept saying, "I don't understand where this is coming from," in a way that told me she genuinely didn't, which told me something important about how invisible my contributions had become. She said Heather hadn't meant anything by it. She said I was being sensitive. She said that family helps family, and she wasn't sure why I was acting like that was something unusual. I said as calmly as I could, "I've been helping for 3 years. I just wanted someone to notice that it was help." She didn't have an answer for that. Heather texted me the next day. It was not an apology. It was closer to a clarification. She said she hadn't meant to hurt my feelings and that she thought I knew she was joking. She then asked if the tuition payment for next semester was still happening because she needed to confirm her housing by the end of the month. I read that text probably 5 times. Then I put my phone down and went for a walk. When I got back, I typed, "The transfers are stopping at the end of this month, as I mentioned in my letter to your mom. I wish you all the best with school." She responded with, "Wow, okay." And then the texts started coming from my uncle. My uncle, who in 3 years had never once called me directly to say thank you, who I had never had a conversation with about any of this, who had received a new set of tires on his truck and a weekend cabin trip and years of quiet financial cushioning. He texted me a paragraph about how I was tearing the family apart over a joke. Over a joke. I didn't respond. I had said what I needed to say in the letter. I wasn't going to have a different version of the same conversation 10 more times. Over the next 2 weeks, I received messages from my aunt, my uncle, Heather, and 2 of my older cousins, who I am fairly sure had been recruited to reach out. The general shape of the messages was, "You overreacted, you're punishing everyone for one comment, you were never obligated to help in the first place, so you can't be mad when it wasn't appreciated." That last one was particularly impressive, logically. I'm still thinking about it. My mom called me at some point in the middle of all of it. I was nervous to talk to her because she and my aunt are close, and I didn't know whose side she was on, and I didn't know whose side she was on, and I didn't want to lose my mom in this. She listened to me tell the whole thing. Not just the dinner, but all 3 years. The spreadsheet, everything. And she was quiet for a long time after. Then she said, "I didn't know it had gotten that big." And I said I hadn't really let myself know either until recently. And she said, "You should have been celebrated. I'm sorry you weren't." I don't know if I cried then. I think I might have. A little. The tuition payment did not go through for the next semester. As far as I know, Heather made other arrangements, a combination of more financial aid, a part-time job, and I believe her parents took out a small loan. It worked out. It was never actually going to be the catastrophe they made it sound like. People figure things out when they have to. My aunt and I have not spoken properly since. We've been at one family gathering, my grandmother's birthday in March, and we were civil, in the way that you're civil with someone when there are other people watching, and you both know it. She hugged me. I hugged her back. We talked about the weather and my grandmother's potato salad and nothing else. Heather was not at the birthday party. She sent a card. I have thought about this a lot in the months since. Not with regret. I want to be clear about that. I don't regret the decision. What I've been sitting with is something more like grief, I think. Grief for the version of the relationship I thought I had, which it turns out I didn't really have. I thought I was a beloved member of a family who was going through a hard time, and I was in a position to help. What I was, apparently, was a line item in someone else's budget, and the moment I asked to be seen as more than that, I became a problem. That's the part that still stings, not the money, not Heather's comment. The fact that when I stopped, the response wasn't, "We're sorry." It was, "How could you?" But here's what I also know. I know that since those transfers stopped, I've been saving in a way I haven't been able to in years. I have a down payment fund that's actually growing. I took myself to Portland last fall, just me and pretzels, at a dog-friendly cabin near Mount Hood, and I hiked and ate good food and read 2 books, and I did not have to feel guilty about spending money on myself for the first time in longer than I can clearly remember. I know that being single at 31 is not a problem that needs to be solved. It is not a character flaw. It is not something to be condescended about at a dinner table by someone whose engagement ring I partially financed. My life is full. My life is mine. And it took cutting off $47,000 in annual giving to fully understand that I had been trying to buy a place at a table that should have been mine by right. I don't know what the next few years look like. Maybe I'll meet someone, and maybe I won't, and I've made my peace with both versions. What I know is that whoever I let into my life going forward, romantically, familially, in any direction, they will know from the start that I am not a resource. I am a person. And the difference between those two things is not negotiable. I'm still me. I still help people. I paid for my friend Gwen's bridesmaid dress last spring because I knew she was going through it and I didn't make a big thing of it. I buy my neighbor's kid school supplies every September because his mom works nights and I like the kid. Generosity is not the problem. Generosity, without boundaries, without acknowledgement, without the basic dignity of being treated like a person rather than an account number. That's the problem. I learned it the hard way. But I did learn it. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately. Not in a cosmic way, just in the plain, practical way that you start to think about things when you've spent 3 years watching a situation unfold and finally understand your own role in creating it. What happened with my aunt's family didn't start with Heather's comment at that dinner. It started years earlier, with a choice I made quietly and kept making without ever examining it. I chose to give without asking for acknowledgement. I chose to absorb the discomfort of being taken for granted rather than name it out loud. I chose every single time to keep the peace instead of telling the truth. Those choices had consequences. And the consequence was a version of myself that had become so useful to everyone around me that no one thought to ask how I was doing, or whether any of it was fair. That's not anyone's fault but mine. I mean that. Not as self-punishment, just as honesty. When you make yourself invisible, you can't be surprised when people stop looking. What took real courage? And I think it was courage, even though it didn't feel dramatic in the moment, just quiet and necessary. Was deciding to stop, not out of anger, not as punishment, but because I finally had the clarity to see that continuing wasn't kindness. It was avoidance. I was avoiding the harder conversation, the one where I would have to say, I need to be seen in this relationship, not just used. And I avoided it for 3 years because that conversation felt selfish, and I had confused selflessness with self-erasure for so long that I didn't know the difference anymore. The moment I wrote that letter, the one I mailed on a Tuesday, the one my aunt read and responded to with confusion rather than recognition, I understood something about integrity that I hadn't fully grasped before. Integrity isn't just about telling the truth to other people. It's about telling the truth to yourself first, even when the truth is uncomfortable. The truth was that I had built a relationship on a foundation that wasn't real, and I had done that as much as anyone else had. Naming it wasn't betrayal. It was the first honest thing I had done in years. There's something about 31 that I didn't expect. I thought it would feel like pressure, like I was supposed to have things figured out by now. The relationship, the family, the whole picture. Instead, it feels like the beginning of actually knowing myself. I know now that I am someone who gives easily and needs to be more careful about that, not because generosity is wrong, but because generosity without self-respect eventually hollows you out. I know that being alone is not a condition to be cured. I know that $47,000 later, I would rather have my dignity back than the version of belonging I thought I was buying. Heather is probably fine. My aunt is probably fine. People adapt when they have to, and that's not cynicism, that's just true. And I am fine too. Better than fine. I have a savings account that's growing for the first time in 3 years, a dog who thinks I hung the moon, and a life that is genuinely mine in a way it wasn't before. That's what I would want anyone to take from this. Not that you should stop helping people. Help people. But know what you're doing when you help. Know whether you're giving from abundance or giving from fear. Know the difference between supporting someone and funding their ability to overlook you. That difference, once you see it, changes everything.